It all began in the pale, fragile hours of the morning, just as the first hints of light began to clear over the Caribbean horizon. The sea was calm, almost deceptively so, with waves barely rippling along the Gulf coastline of Venezuela. The sky was clear, and for a fleeting moment, everything seemed ordinary, peaceful, and quiet. Then, almost without warning, the silence was shattered. 2 U.S. Navy F/A, 18 Super Hornets appeared, cutting through the dawn like twin streaks of fire, moving faster than anything the eye could track comfortably. Their speed was staggering, over 1,200 miles per hour, and their proximity to the shore was almost daringly close, less than 60 meters above the waterline. No radio call preceded their approach. No official notice had been given. Nothing on the surface hinted that this was happening. Only the roar, the vibration in the air, the sharp outline of advanced fighter jets appearing with deadly precision. From above, they might have seemed like ordinary patrols to the untrained eye, but to anyone monitoring the skies or responsible for coastal defense, the message was unmistakable. These were no casual flights. They were intentional, calculated, and designed to command attention. Every fraction of a second mattered. Every movement was deliberate, and the stakes were immediately clear. The coastline they flew along was one of the most strategically sensitive in all of Venezuela. Nestled along these shores were vital oil terminals, heavily fortified air bases, and radar stations that had been meticulously maintained for decades. These facilities were the heartbeat of the nation's coastal security and economic stability. Any aircraft moving through this corridor, especially at such speeds and proximity, would trigger alarms and require instant response. And that is precisely what happened. As the jets sliced through the air, Venezuelan radar operators and air defense personnel scrambled into action. Screens lit up with bright blips, warning tones filled command rooms, and personnel leaned in closer to their consoles, eyes scanning every movement. Orders were repeated, phones rang in rapid succession, and procedures designed for maximum efficiency kicked into gear. The atmosphere inside these rooms was taut, a mix of urgency, focus, and barely suppressed tension. Each person knew that even a single moment of hesitation could make the difference between maintaining control and losing it entirely. The brilliance of this operation lay not in aggression, but in subtlety. There were no missiles fired, no warnings broadcasted, no overt confrontations. What the U.S. Navy was demonstrating was something far more powerful: the ability to exert pressure without crossing the line into open conflict. By flying at such incredible speed and in such close proximity to sensitive areas, they forced Venezuela to react continuously. Every second demanded attention. Every blip on the radar required confirmation, and every decision was being logged, analyzed, and remembered. For the Venezuelan forces, this was a test unlike any other. The jets' movements were calculated to be both familiar and unpredictable. Slight changes in altitude, minor adjustments in angle, tiny variations in speed, all were designed to make radar operators question patterns, to make them second-guess their instincts, and to ensure that no one could relax. What might have seemed like a routine morning patrol became a constant, relentless drill, stretching their attention, endurance, and focus to the limits. Even as the jets passed repeatedly, there was no panic, no sudden maneuvers, no overt acts of provocation beyond their presence. And yet, the effect was undeniable. Venezuela was on edge, their forces fully activated, their defenses alert, and their decision-makers forced into rapid-fire calculations of what each flight meant. Every flight was a silent message, a subtle assertion of dominance, and a demonstration of how control and presence can communicate power as clearly as any weapon. This was the opening act of a high-stakes confrontation played out not through explosions or combat, but through timing, discipline, and psychological pressure. From the deck of the U.S. carrier to the radar stations along Venezuela's Gulf Coast, every move was deliberate, every reaction expected, and every moment measured. What the outside world might have perceived as a simple morning patrol was, in reality, a meticulously orchestrated operation designed to assert dominance without ever firing a shot. It was the perfect demonstration of modern power: presence, precision, and pressure delivered with terrifying efficiency. In those early hours, the Gulf of Venezuela had become a proving ground. Every sensor, every operator, every response was being tested. What seemed like a routine flight path was actually a carefully calculated message that even without combat, power could be shown, attention could be seized, and the limits of endurance could be explored. The opening move had been made, and it was clear to all involved that the stakes were higher than anyone outside the room could imagine. As the U.S. Navy F/A 18 Super Hornets continued their relentless cycles over the Gulf coastline, the strain on Venezuelan air defense crews grew steadily, almost imperceptibly at first, then inescapably. Each pass of the jets seemed familiar from a distance, yet up close, every flight was subtly different. The pilots adjusted altitude by mere thousands of feet, shifted speed in fractions that could change response timing, and altered their angles of approach just enough to force new calculations on the ground. To the untrained eye, these minor variations might have seemed inconsequential, but in air defense, where seconds can determine the outcome of a crisis, every subtle change mattered. The Venezuelan operators, conditioned to follow patterns and anticipate movements, were suddenly confronted with a challenge designed to test not only their technical skills, but their patience, endurance, and ability to think clearly under pressure. Inside radar stations and command rooms, personnel leaned closer to their screens with each pass. Hands hovered over switches, ready to act, yet restrained by strict procedures and careful orders. Their eyes darted from one monitor to another, tracking dots that moved with calculated precision, some of them real, some designed to deceive. Every operator knew that a single mistake could ripple across the entire coastal defense network, potentially exposing vulnerabilities. The repetitive nature of the flights created a kind of psychological friction. Over time, focus began to waver, responses slowed even by fractions of a second, and tiny gaps in attention began to appear. This was the intended effect. The U.S. operation was not meant to provoke a direct confrontation. It was designed to test limits, to measure endurance, and to see how well the other side could maintain discipline under prolonged stress. Meanwhile, the U.S. pilots operated with precision and consistency. On board the carrier, the rhythm of launches and recoveries followed a meticulous schedule. One jet landed hot, tires smoking against the deck, engines still screaming, while another prepared to launch within minutes. Refueling crews worked efficiently, almost automatically, aware that any delay could disrupt the carefully orchestrated cycle. The pilots themselves rotated in shifts, ensuring that each aircraft maintained optimal performance without overextending any individual crew. Fatigue was managed strategically on their side. They were prepared for a continuous operation that would last hours, or even a full day. The goal was not speed for its own sake, but endurance, the ability to sustain a constant, unbroken presence that forced the opposing side to control. Back on the ground, Venezuelan personnel felt the pressure in every sense. Fuel reserves for aircraft had to be monitored carefully. Pilots were kept on standby with engines primed, and radar operators remained glued to their screens with no opportunity to step away. Even small breaks could mean missing a critical pattern or a subtle deviation in the jet's behavior. The airspace itself became a zone of tension, every moment charged with uncertainty. It was not enough to simply react correctly. Operators had to anticipate the next move, to analyze changes in trajectory, to detect the slightest anomaly that might indicate the real target or objective. Each flight forced a decision, each decision drained mental energy, and each moment of hesitation increased the risk of miscalculation. Over time, the U.S. strategy began to reveal its brilliance. Control was exerted not through aggression or direct confrontation, but through continuous, predictable pressure applied in unpredictable ways. The repetitive flights created a rhythm, yet each repetition contained subtle variations designed to prevent complacency. It was a lesson in endurance, patience, and the art of psychological dominance. The Venezuelan forces could do nothing but respond, cycle after cycle, until their attention, focus, and confidence were being tested to the limit. By the end of several hours, the difference between the two sides was stark. The U.S. maintained calm, coordinated control in the air, while the Venezuelan crews experienced increasing fatigue, stress, and uncertainty on the ground. No missiles had been fired. No aggressive maneuvers or direct attacks had taken place. Yet the balance of control had shifted subtly but decisively. The operation had worn down the other side without violence, draining energy, focus, and endurance while asserting dominance through presence alone. Every minute, every pass, every subtle change in speed or angle became a silent weapon, one designed to test, measure, and and shape the reactions of those below. This stage of the confrontation made one thing clear. Modern military influence is as much about patience and endurance as it is about firepower. Control can be exercised quietly, invisibly, but with devastating effect on those forced to respond. By cycling continuously, altering flight details, and maintaining unbroken presence, the U.S. had turned repetition into leverage, turning the act of watching and reacting into a battlefield itself. The Venezuelan crews were trapped in a subtle but unyielding test, a marathon of focus, discipline, and resilience that exposed weaknesses even without a single shot being fired. As the hours stretched on, the situation grew far more complex than mere fast jets in the sky. What had started as a test of endurance and discipline over the Gulf coastline now evolved into a battle of perception, subtlety, and mental resilience. The U.S. Navy, having established continuous flight cycles, introduced a new layer to the operation: electronic interference. At first, the changes were almost imperceptible. Radar contacts flickered for milliseconds. Signals appeared to split into multiple dots, and data that had previously been reliable now seemed uncertain. To an outside observer, it may have seemed like minor glitches or technical quirks, but to the Venezuelan radar operators and command personnel, the effect was profound. Every blip on the screen demanded analysis. Every anomaly required verification, and every decision carried the weight of potential consequences. Civilian GPS systems also began to feel the impact. Ship captains found their navigation systems momentarily misaligned. Cargo vessels adjusted their routes unexpectedly, and even local drivers were confusion. These disruptions were not the primary objective, but served as a force multiplier, adding subtle chaos to an already tense situation. The operators on the ground could no longer rely solely on the screens and instruments they had trusted for years. Their confidence, built on training and routine, started to waver. Questions that would normally be answered with instinctive precision now required careful consideration. Hesitation crept in. Every second spent confirming a contact or verifying a reading became precious, potentially decisive. The combination of relentless aerial cycles and electronic anomalies transformed the confrontation from a purely physical challenge into a psychological one. Venezuelan personnel, already fatigued from constant monitoring, now faced a puzzle layered with uncertainty. Was that a real aircraft on the radar, or a decoy signal meant to mislead? Was the blinking that a temporary glitch, or did it indicate a genuine threat approaching their most sensitive coastal installations? Each answer had to be balanced against hours of unbroken alertness, limited rest, and the subtle pressure of knowing that every decision could carry consequences far beyond the immediate moment. Inside command rooms, the atmosphere shifted. The familiar hum of electronics became both a source of information and a source of tension. Operators leaned closer, eyes darting between monitors, scanning radar lines that now seemed to dance unpredictably. Data that once provided clarity now introduced ambiguity. Each false signal, every split contact, and every unexpected trace forced attention in multiple directions simultaneously. Simple errors, moments of doubt, delayed responses, or misinterpreted signals could cascade into larger vulnerabilities. The U.S. pilots, flying with flawless consistency above, understood precisely how these subtle electronic maneuvers could magnify the pressure on those below. They did not need to attack. They only needed to manipulate perception, creating a battlefield in the minds of the defenders. What had begun as a test of speed, altitude, and endurance now became a test of cognition, instinct, and psychological stamina. The mental toll on Venezuelan personnel was immense. They had to separate real threats from decoys, analyze shifting patterns, and make critical judgments under conditions designed to erode certainty. Trust in systems, the cornerstone of air defense, was beginning to crack. Operators questioned whether their instincts were reliable, whether their training could keep up with the subtle manipulations being applied. In effect, hesitation and doubt had become weapons themselves, turning every decision into a potential liability. Meanwhile, above the Gulf, the U.S. Super Hornets maintained calm, precise flight patterns, appearing almost serene against the chaos below. From their perspective, everything was methodical. Altitude maintained, spacing perfect, timing precise. Yet every subtle change in trajectory, Every momentary adjustment in speed served a hidden purpose. It was no longer simply about presence or endurance. It was about shaping the perceptions of the opposing side, controlling what was seen and what was believed. Psychological dominance became as important as physical control of the airspace. The combination of relentless aerial presence and electronic interference created a complex web. Venezuelan radar operators were trapped in a cycle of observation and analysis, forced to make high-stakes decisions without absolute clarity. The more they reacted, the more fatigued they became. The more they hesitated, the greater the risk of misjudgment. Each blip, each anomaly, and each false signal subtly shifted the balance of power. The U.S. Navy had turned airspace into a theater of the mind, where control was measured not in missiles fired, but in confidence shaken, attention stretched, and hesitation induced. By the time the sun climbed higher over the Gulf, the confrontation had entered a new dimension. Physical endurance had merged with mental endurance. Speed and altitude were no longer the only challenges. Now perception itself was being tested. Each operator on the Venezuelan side was forced to confront the possibility that their senses and instruments could not be trusted fully. The subtlety of this operation illustrated a modern truth of warfare. Dominance does not always require violence. By shaping perception, controlling information, and creating uncertainty, one side could assert overwhelming influence without a single shot fired. The Gulf of Venezuela had become not just a physical battleground, but a psychological proving ground. Every decision, every reaction, and every blink of hesitation could tip the scales. What had started as pressure in the skies had now transformed into a silent, invisible war of the mind, proving that modern conflict is as much about controlling belief and attention as it is about controlling territory. Even after hours of relentless operations, the intensity of the confrontation never eased. Yet remarkably, no missiles were fired, no bombs dropped, and no official boundaries were crossed. The skies remained contested, the air charged with tension, but the clash never became violent in the conventional sense. This was not due to luck or oversight. It was the deliberate outcome of disciplined strategy on both sides. The U.S. Navy had demonstrated a modern principle of military power. Dominance does not always require direct attacks. Instead, it can be established through sustained presence, endurance, and the subtle shaping of an adversary's decision. By controlling the tempo of the encounter, forcing constant vigilance, and maintaining an unbroken cycle of observation and subtle pressure, one side could influence outcomes without ever firing a single shot. On the ground in Venezuela, the effects of this strategy were profound. Publicly, officials responded with measured statements of sovereignty and readiness. Air bases conducted visible training exercises. Pilots went through drills, and government statements emphasized preparedness and control. To the outside world, it appeared that the nation was responding with calm, deliberate strength. Behind the scenes, however, the reality was far different. The radar operators and air defense crews were working under mounting strain. Hours of continuous monitoring, repeated calculations, and constant analysis left fatigue accumulating at every level. The mental and physical toll of responding to persistent, unpredictable, and high-speed aerial maneuvers began to show. Sleep became fragmented, focus waned, and even small errors carried potential consequences that could ripple through the entire coastal defense network. Every individual involved understood that one misjudgment could escalate the situation, even without an active engagement. Meanwhile, the U.S. carriers and flight crews operated with methodical precision. Flight decks maintained strict launch and recovery schedules, jets rotated seamlessly between sorties, and pilots executed maneuvers with flawless discipline. Above the water, aircraft held perfect spacing, executed consistent flight paths, and maintained a tempo that forced the Venezuelan side to remain continuously alert. Even as the intensity of the operation grew, the U.S. teams adhered to the principle of restraint, demonstrating that control and dominance can be achieved through strategy, presence, and endurance rather than explosive action. The Gulf of Venezuela, for all practical purposes, became a proving ground for modern military tactics. Here, every element of warfare was tested without traditional weapons. Sensors, radar systems, decision-making processes, and human endurance were all under evaluation. The U.S. demonstrated that conflict could be waged through psychological pressure, through manipulating perception, and through the slow, unyielding drain of focus and energy. The Venezuelan side, for its part, had to contend with these pressures while maintaining discipline and avoiding mistakes. Their restraint was as much a test of strategy as the U.S. maneuvers above them. Each measured response, each carefully considered action, was a silent acknowledgement of the stakes. This encounter highlighted a crucial reality of contemporary military strategy. The battle does not always begin or end with explosions. Success can be determined by who holds attention, who controls tempo, and who can endure prolonged, high-pressure situations. By the end of the standoff, both sides had made their positions clear. The U.S. had shown that sustained presence alone could impose influence and force the opposing side to act within predefined constraints. Venezuela had demonstrated discipline, choosing to absorb pressure and avoid escalation. Yet the cost of this restraint was tangible, hidden behind the public displays and statements. Stress, fatigue, and the constant mental weight of knowing that the margin for error was impossibly thin. The significance of the Gulf of Venezuela as a proving ground extended beyond this single confrontation. It illustrated that future encounters could be faster, closer, and even less forgiving. The lessons were clear. In modern conflict, restraint can be as decisive as action. Psychological endurance, disciplined responses, and the ability to remain composed under constant pressure can determine the outcome long before weapons are deployed. The operation also underscored that modern military power is not defined solely by the destructive capacity of missiles or bombs, but by the ability to control situations, shape perceptions, and apply unrelenting pressure while maintaining discipline. As the skies finally quieted, the impact of the engagement lingered. No explosions marked victory, yet the balance of attention had shifted. Each side had gained knowledge, tested the other's limits, and learned how presence, timing, and endurance could function as potent instruments of influence. The Gulf of Venezuela remained a reminder that modern confrontations are increasingly subtle, strategic, and psychological.